Well, last week we had the Dash background because she exited the format, and now it's Azalea's turn. That means we have one Arcane Rising hero left in the form of Kano, still in the classic constructed metagame. What does Azalea's exit right before the start of Pro Tour Singapore do for our metagame? Well, let's talk about it. First things first, yes, Azalea did indeed pick up a battle-hardened win over this past weekend. One thing I forgot to even factor in last week is that there were battle hardens going on leading up to Pro Tour Singapore. I thought that was kind of crazy. To forget that, my bad. And well, it turns out it was not inconsequential because Azalea does indeed exit this format and will be making her way onto this Living Legend leaderboard at the conclusion of this week, right as Pro Tour Singapore is starting. How crazy is that? And again, that leaves Kano alone at the top of the leaderboard. No more Arcane Rising companions to join him. Kano's sitting up there just waiting his turn to make his exit next to Fi, who's been floundering up there ever since 2 years ago when he won Worlds alongside of a bunch of these other sort of old school Flesh and Blood version 1 heroes. Katsu, Bravo, Dorinthia, all of these heroes that are from the first couple of sets and just never really had their, I guess, moment in the sun. That's not the best way to put it, because they've had good, like Dorinthia's had good moments early on in the game, but outside of that, Katsu has had flashes at times, but outside of that, it hasn't really been that poster child performance that we've seen from like the Lexi Live Wires of the world. They'll get there eventually, but the real question is, what does Azalea's exit do for Pro Tour Singapore? And that's the interesting part, because in some ways it gives a good matchup back to some heroes, and it takes away a bad matchup for other heroes. So Azalea, here's Azalea's overall win percentages and win rates into all of these heroes, and I can scroll over. Thanks to Fablazing data, we can look at all of this. This is all played in paper across the Nationals season, the most recent, higher tier tournament runs, if you will. And Azalea, across all of those matches, 1,089 matches, only has just a 0.5% percentage points below halfway. So she's 49.5% of a win rate. That's the better way to say it. I don't know what I was saying before. I was trying to point out that she's basically at 50%, but I said it in perhaps the worst way possible. So flame me in the comments for that. Feel free. Nevertheless, what were her good matchups? That's what was really important. She had a positive win rate into Syndra, one of the best and most represented decks in the format. She also had a positive win rate into Verdant's Thorn of the Rose, another one of the more represented heroes in the format. So she is giving those good matchups for her away, obviously. Those bad matchups are being, removed from Syndra and Verdance, and that's not inconsequential. It does mean that we could be, seeing more Syndra hit the board. We could be seeing more Verdance hit the board, but I don't think it moves the needle too terribly much, because there are other heroes that sort of balance those heroes out. Like Syndra had a bad matchup into Azalea Ace in the Hole, but still has to contend with Arakni slipped through the cracks, one of the most powerful heroes in the game and one of the most winningest heroes on the Nationals season, with a 57.6% win rate across over 1,000 games played. See, that's the interesting thing. Azalea had a bad matchup into Arakni slipped through the cracks. So the needle doesn't move too terribly much with her exiting, because one of the better heroes still curbs the other better hero. Syndra gains that matchup back. It was a negative matchup for her. She gains those percentage points back, but still has to contend with Arakni slip through the cracks. The same thing can kind of be said for Verdance, because Verdance gains that bad matchup back. She had a 40% win rate into Azalea, so not terrible, but also just a losing win rate, not a good one. But Verdance still has to contend with Gravy Bones, who had a positive win rate into that matchup as well, and has a positive win rate into Verdance. That's the interesting thing about how this is all sort of fleshing out, is Verdance gains some points in, like this whole calculation of, I had a bad matchup, I lose, but you're still having to contend with Gravy Bones, who had a good matchup there as well. So the passing of Azalea doesn't necessarily move the needle as much as you would think. Even though she's had good results, even though she's been doing reasonably well and picked up her fair share of wins. I mean, again, if we look, she's picked up 68 points this season. Looking at the board, that's like one of the top point getting amounts across all of these events that have been going on in the high seas season. Of course, alongside of New and Dash IE, who have also gone this specific season. She's at the top, or near the top, I should say, because Gravy Bones technically has 2 more points than her. She's near the top of that leaderboard. So she's been doing well, even though she has this negative win rate. The conversions from specific people have gotten her those points across the board. So with her exit, Azalea leaves behind a more aggressive meta than we had to this point, because she is one of those decks that, while still aggressive, has disruptive tools to curb those aggressive decks. She was still weak to disruption in the form of Arakni Slip Through the Cracks. She was a little bit weak to, you know, pure aggro. But if, like, for example, Syndra, if a hero wanted to go wide and didn't want to pay for things, she had answers. And she had ways to stop these big, you know, like multiple action point turns, or multiple go again, I should say, turns, not multiple action point turns, which is how Dash could kind of get around in that matchup. Either way, her exit leaves more space for these types of heroes, these aggressive heroes, to dominate the meta. Now, what rises up to meet a Syndra, and specifically, I'm really looking at Arakni for Pro Tour Singapore and Dash.io. What meets these heroes head on and tries to answer that? Because all 3 of them have positive win rates into Gravy Bones, another hero that I think a lot of people are looking at to do pretty well over the weekend, and has continued to do pretty well, even when people are clearly targeting the deck. Well, my thought is Guardian. I'm thinking that Guardian has some amount of tools to answer any of these heroes. The most dangerous of all of these heroes, in my opinion, is still Arakni Slip Through the Cracks. These other 2 heroes, Syndra and Dash.io, particularly Syndra, have put up more results, but Arakni Slip Through the Cracks is a dominant force, I think, right now, and probably the deck to target and beat. And who's targeting them the best? Maybe someone like Jarl. Jarl could be an answer to these top 3 decks. Unfortunately, Jarl is pretty struggling into both Gravy Bones and Verdance, I think 2 other heroes that we're going to be keeping our eye out for in Pro Tour Singapore. I would look at something like Jarl if you're expecting a large swath of the meta to be Syndra, Arakni, and Dio. The other option being this big guy right here, Victor Goldmane, both high and mighty. Yes, that's right, we put them both together. High and mighty is a great response to Syndra, a middling response to Dio and Arakni Slip Through the Cracks, but he has the capacity to high roll in those matchups to some degree and start off very, very strong. I was doing some testing yesterday and played against a Victor Goldmane who on turn 0 was able to establish through blocking a trounce, multiple gold on his turn, took over on turn 1, was able to create like 4 might tokens off of visiting the Goldmane estate, a bunch of gold, and send like a buffed CNC or something like that, and then followed it up on the next turn with a 10 CNC that got red pummeled. Like, that is a fiery start from a hero like Victor Goldmane, and that is something that can really answer Dash.io, who can't block, and Syndra, who will never block and loses that matchup. Again, the struggle will be for Arakni Slip Through the Cracks, and I think that's why I am so high on this hero. I think Arakni is truly, at this point, the best deck and the deck to beat in the format. It has answers in the form of like a Verdance, perhaps, and some of these slower decks. Even look at this, Arakni Slip Through the Cracks has a terrible win rate into Arakni Marionette, which we could see coming up, rising up in the ranks as well. So if we grab Arakni Marionette, who has some pretty plus matchups into some other heroes, unfortunately loses the Azalea matchup, has some good matchups into some of these ancillary heroes like Kasai, who I'm a big fan of, good matchups into Jarl, and some of these other heroes towards the back here. The real question is, how does Arakni fare into Syndra? And it's not good based on the data. I personally have not played Arakni Marionette in ages, so I couldn't speak to the efficacy of the matchup itself. Nevertheless, looking at the data, it does appear to be a losing matchup for Syndra. It does appear to be a losing matchup for Gravy Bones. It does appear to be a losing matchup for Verdant. So if you're taking Arakni Marionette out, you're hoping that you can target Arakni Slip Through the Cracks and gain the plus of the Arakni Slip Through the Cracks text and be able to do some crazy stuff for Marionette. Otherwise, you're going to be running into some bad matchups, unless you really just think it's going to be a Guardian response, or a warrior response with like Kasai and Dorinthia to these aggressive heroes that don't want to block. Because if that's the case, then you might be targeting the correct meta. For my money though, I'm putting it on Arakni Slip Through the Cracks as the deck that everyone is looking to beat. If you're not looking at this deck and going, how do I win that matchup? Then I think you're failing yourself, because that does appear to be a deck that is sitting at the top alongside of Syndra, alongside of Dash.io, though much less represented. Maybe not much less, just a bit less represented, I think, going into Pro Tour Singapore. I think Gravy and Verdance, these are the 5 decks that I think determine, in whatever configuration you see, those 5 decks without Azalea determine how you will play your hero in the meta. If you're expecting more aggression, less disruption, and you're expecting more going wide and less Gravy Bones and Verdance, then you need to build a deck accordingly. If you're expecting Gravy Bones to do better and to be very highly represented, then playing an aggressive hero is a great answer, because you can see he very much struggles into the Syndras based on this data, into the Arakni Slip Through the Cracks, and even to some degree, wherever she is, into Dash.io right there. So that's the real question. Where these 5 heroes break down and into their denominations, that's what we're going to see in Pro Tour Singapore. And I, for one, am personally very much looking forward to it. I was kind of excited that Azalea was going to possibly make it into the mix, because I think she's actually doing pretty well right now. And I was right, because she did well enough to hit the Living Legend status, which she will join the ranks of very soon. Hope you enjoyed this type of content. If you do, if you want to make this number go to the other number, I would be forever in your debt, and you would be like a pretty good friend of mine. Like, not my best friend, but like a pretty good friend. At least on like that B tier of friends, if you press the button. That's pretty cool though. Yeah, just one button B tier friend. That's what you can be. As always, thanks for watching.